We're down around 30 degrees track temperature for this morning's race. Track temperature now is increasing, and it's up to the teams to adapt to that.
Here's a look at the results of race one from earlier on here today. The grid positions this afternoon are set by the Superpole session yesterday morning. No TISO Superpole race this weekend in light of yesterday's events. Toprak Razgatlioglu was your race one winner ahead of Jonathan Ray in second. Third place going to Scott Redding after a late overtake on Andrea Locatelli, relegated to fourth. Alvaro Bautista an isolated fifth, but that's a string of top five results for him dating back to the Catalunya round with that podium in the Superpole race. Loris Baz on his return to the Superbike World Championship was the top independent rider with P6, a great result for him and for Go 11 Ducati. Alex Lowes, who started up on the front row of the grid from P2, dropped back through the field in the early stages before consolidating his pace and coming home in P9. By and large, theoretically, you'd expect a similar race in race number two, but the track conditions are very different to anything we saw earlier on here today. Cooler temperatures inevitably in the morning, and track temperatures well and truly up compared to what we saw earlier on today.
Yeah, 45 degrees track temperatures now, and that's going to be hotter in some areas, which is going to place a big strain onto the tyres as well. It's going to make it a lot greasier out there, less grip out there for the riders. It's going to be up to them to adapt to it. We saw in this morning's race, Toprak Razgatlioglu was able to use the super soft compound tyre. He was able to use that to his advantage as well to claim the race victory. It's going to be interesting to see if everyone has to use the same tyres or if some riders have to make some changes.
Toprak now 6 points clear of Jonathan Ray in the championship pecking order. He came into race one just a single point ahead, and it was a bar-banging affair this morning. Razgatlioglu's first attempt at moving through on Ray, a little bit over-ambitious, but his second, much cleaner, through he went for the win.
Yeah, more than bar-banging. At least if you're banging bars, you're alongside. Toprak too far back in that instance, and good that both riders were able to stay upright and live to fight another day. Obviously, they fought again into turn one. Toprak able to make a nice clean move on that occasion.
Toprak then celebrating his latest victory, his 9th of this 2021 campaign. Really has been the dominant force over feature-length races. He benefits, in a sense, from the fact that there is no Superpole race this weekend. That's been one of Jonathan Ray's main strengths.
Yeah, and I think for Jonathan, obviously, in those 10-lap Superpole races, with giving 12 points, he's had a big advantage. Had a big advantage in Superpole sessions as well, where he's been able to claim a lot of pole positions. But we've seen that as the season's progressed, momentum's shift more and more towards the blue corner of Toprak, and that's been again the case this weekend.
Scott Redding is third in the championship standings. He was third in race one. In fact, the race one results in the top three positions, finishing exactly as they are in that championship pecking order. Razgatlioglu, Ray and Redding. For Redding, well, he was up within 1.5 seconds of Toprak and Jonathan in the opening couple of laps. Faded away from the tail of Andrea Locatelli before coming on strong in the latter stages.
Yeah, and we saw as the race progressed that he did get stronger and stronger and was able to take that move on Locatelli in the closing stages and able to get onto the podium. And the one thing for Redding is, as it gets hotter, will he be able to maintain that kind of form? We saw last year here in Jerez he was able to do that, but this year is very different as well, because we know that more and more riders are able to use that super soft compound tyre. Will Scott Redding be one of those riders in the hot conditions able to get away with it?
69 points his gap to Toprak Razgatlioglu, and unless there's a series of incidents involving Toprak and Jonathan Ray, then it's going to be a challenge for Redding to breaking news. Sorry, I'm just going to interrupt myself. Breaking news along the bottom of your screen. Just receiving confirmation that Alex Lowes has been declared unfit to take part in race two this afternoon. So clearly not a full range of movement in that onto the front row of the grid for race one, but earlier on today, although he was brave, dug deep and scored a 9th position finish, it's obviously been decided that he is not fit enough to take his place this afternoon.
Yeah, and that's a shame for Lowes, considering he did a really good job in race one. As the race progressed, he got faster and faster, was able to move his way into 9th position, but that's a big shame for him, and a big shame for Kawasaki as well, because this is a weekend where they've looked really strong. We saw obviously all the way through the free practice sessions, Lowes and Jonathan Ray right up there at the front. In the Superpole session, both of them on the front row of the grid, but that's obviously going to have an impact now on Kawasaki as well going forward.
Does mean that we have also got a revised grid now. Everyone who would have been behind Alex Lowes, which is every rider but Toprak Razgatlioglu, will gain a single place. It promotes Scott Redding up onto the front row of the grid. It also promotes Loris Baz onto the second row. So both of those riders, the main beneficiaries of Alex Lowe's unfortunate withdrawal from race 2 here this afternoon. First time we've had an opportunity to catch up with Jonathan Rea. Very much second best to Toprak Razgatlioglu. Is there anything that Rea can do differently in race 2 this afternoon to try and take the fight to him?
Well, the one thing for Jonathan Rea is, as the temperatures come up, will he be able to still bring that fight to Toprak? And that's going to be a real challenge, and it's difficult to see where he's going to be able to find that time on Toprak. But how often in the past have we seen Jonathan Rea and Kawasaki suddenly find an answer? I think Toprak, though, he's a very different puzzle compared to when you're up against Scott Redding, Alvaro Bautista, Tom Sykes, Chaz Davis. We just haven't seen any weaknesses from Toprak or from Yamaha this year.
Is there a chance that it's going to be a tougher task for Jonathan Rea just to claim second position here this afternoon as well, particularly given the hotter temperatures? We saw what happened to him in race 2 in Catalonia last Sunday, of course.
Well, the one thing in Catalonia was he opted for that super soft compound tyre. In this morning's race, he used the harder compound tyre. Maybe he does the same in this afternoon's race, and then he's able to still manage that quite well through the course of the race.
This is Loris Baz, who's come in as a replacement for the injured Chaz Davies, resting up at home with 2 broken ribs and hoping to return in time for Argentina. Great result as a stand-in for Baz, 6th position earlier on here today. And after a challenging season for him racing in the US in Moto America, perfect way to return to a paddock he knows well, of course, here in World SBK as a former world number 5, and immediately show everyone what they've been missing. Yeah,
and I think that's one of the big things for Loris, and now starting from the second row of the grid, elevated at 1 position with Lowe's sitting out the action. That means that he's going to get the opportunity to see if he's able to stay in those leading positions once again. I thought it was a really good performance from Baz to come away with 6th earlier on today, and he's done well all the way through this weekend, readapted to World SBK very well.
4th position in the end for Andrea Locatelli in race 1, picked off by Scott Redding, but he's in the right company, isn't he? Fighting with the likes of the factory Ducati in the hands of Redding, and not too far adrift in the early stages of the race, certainly from the likes of Razgatlioglu and Rea. There was a moment there when Toprak and Jonathan clashed as Toprak rather ambitiously tried to make his way through, but I thought if these two get in one another's way, it opens the door for the likes of Locatelli and Scott Redding to challenge for race victories.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the big things for a lot of riders now in this race. They're going to feel that there will be an opportunity to bring that fight. Obviously, we saw Locatelli in the opening race of the weekend just not quite having the answers that he would have expected. Gave up a bit of ground compared to his teammate Toprak during the course of that race. Maybe Andrew Pitt and Andrea Locatelli have found a little bit of something for the afternoon, because they'll want to get themselves into the scrap for the podiums and see if they can take some points off Jonathan Rea in that championship battle as well.
Almost inexplicable crash for Michael Ruben Rinaldi in race 1. It means that he comes into this race just 4 points ahead of Andrea Locatelli in that battle for 4th position in the World Championship standings.
It's a real close battle between Rinaldi, Locatelli. Obviously, Lowe's sitting out this race as well now is going to potentially open up that points of advantage again. But you can see for Rinaldi, he's confused as to why he had that crash, and obviously everyone in Ducati the same. But now the big thing for him is just to try and get himself back out there. I think one of the interesting things for Rinaldi was he was out there on that harder compound rear tyre, so clearly Ducati had made a decision to manage that, just have an incident like that, but not an awful lot Rinaldi could have done about it.
Yes, just on the change of direction for Michael Ruben Rinaldi, the bike almost kicks him off, fails to score therefore from race number 1, and as I say, we've got a 3-rider, possibly even more, fight for 4th in the World Championship standings in 2021. And the rider trying to peg his way back on the likes of Rinaldi, Locatelli and Lowe's is Michael van der Mark. Van der Mark making progress. Watch for him again here. Started from 13th position on the grid in race 1. Of course, he will be now promoted into onto the 4th row of the grid, and Van der Mark finished race 1 in 7th position. So it'll be interesting to see whether he can make swift progress again in race 2.
Yeah, it was interesting as the race progressed and we moved into the second half of it. That's whenever we started to see this man, Loris Baz, stretch a lead over Van der Mark, and then in the closing stages it was tougher and tougher from the BMW rider. But certainly for Van der Mark, he goes really well here in Jerez, the former race winner in the Superbike class.
Van der Mark being promoted up, excuse me, Van der Mark being promoted up onto the 4th row of the grid, breaks up our all BMW 5th row that would have been Van der Mark, Folger and Laverty, and was indeed in race number 1. Laverty will now start from 14th position on the grid. You can just see him preparing for what is his second race back, effectively, in World SBK after a long break since Donington Park, after problems for the RC Squadra Corsa outfit. And Laverty acquitting himself well enough. 12th position finish behind the sort of regular top 10, 11 riders that you'd include, the likes of Gerloff and Haslam. And Laverty now will be hoping to sort of break into that group over the course of race 2.
Yeah, he was closing in fast on Haslam at the end of the race by half a second a lap at times, but just gave himself a bit too much work to do to bridge that gap. But certainly he'll look to get closer to Van der Mark in this race than in this morning's race. Try and learn from that.
Yes, a bit of a group from Baz in 6th position down to Gerloff in 10th position, 5.5 seconds covering them. The target for the riders who finished a little bit further back, the likes of Haslam and Laverty, is to try and get into that group and be able to race for positions as high as 6th. Down, realistically, the favourites for the podium positions are your top 5 on this grid, and perhaps you might add Alvaro Bautista into the equation as well if he can get off to a better start.
Yeah, for Bautista, we know that in the hotter conditions he always manages his tyre very well. Was able to come away with a top 5 finish this morning to maintain that form. That's 3 in a row for him, and you'd certainly think that he should be able to use his bike very well during the course of this race as well.
Yes, best run that Alvaro Bautista has had in this 2021 campaign. A little bit of work for Tati Mercado and the MIE Honda outfit after his retirement due to mechanical problems in race 1. And Mercado will be lining up from 10th position on the grid, so an important opportunity for him to try and mix it with that group of riders I was talking about as well.
Yeah, and we saw Tati have that technical issue. He's actually been pretty strong all the way through this weekend, qualifying on the 4th row of the grid, and he had that issue while running in the points as well. And the MIE squad, it's important for them to be able to have that bit of form as well. You can see Toprak there, a bit of a stoppie on the run into turn 1. This didn't go too well for him last year when he tried doing the showboating on Sunday afternoon.
Yes, I'd almost forgotten about that. Toprak Razgatlioglu with a little bit of a low side making his way round towards the start line. Didn't affect him or cost him too dearly. Mistakes have been very rare for Toprak over the course of this 2021 season, it must be said. Race 1 victory, his first win since the French round, had 2 second places, the best of his results in the Catalonia round last weekend. But this Iberian triple header starting well enough for him. He leads by 6 points again. That gap, as we said previously in race number 1, hasn't been more than 9 points at any stage over the last few rounds, and really since Toprak closed down the margin to Jonathan Rea, there's been little to choose between them.
Yeah, and there's been basically a cigarette paper between them for most of the season. It's just been who's had the momentum behind them. Right now it's Toprak that has that momentum. You would have expected it in Catalonia, kind of expected here as well in the hotter conditions, that the Yamaha should be a little bit easier on its tyres, a little bit more manageable around this race. But next week in Portimao, that's where it should swing back in Jonathan Rea's favour, and these are really important times for their championship battle. Obviously we've still got Argentina and Indonesia to come, but these final rounds in Europe, really important to give yourself that foundation going to the end of season flyaways.
Particularly important for Jonathan Rea. We know he's the master of Portimao, and it's a circuit where he's been dominant in the past, where he's had the records in terms of race victories, and if he doesn't pick up major points on Toprak next time out, it's difficult to see where he can.
Well, let's be honest, it's crucial for Jonathan Rea. He's the rider with everything to lose. He's won 6 world championships in a row. Whoever beats him finally to a world championship is going to be seen as an absolute hero. That could be Toprak, but as it is, if Toprak can't get it done, he's just been the same as all those other riders that have fallen by the wayside in the past as well. Rea is the one that's under pressure.
That, of course, is assuming that Jonathan Rea doesn't continue his winning run until retiring as world champion, which, of course, is the story that Jonathan Rea would certainly like to write for himself.
Yeah, and certainly the way that Rea has ridden all the way through this season, you're not going to discount him whatsoever, because he's riding better than ever. We've seen him have to bring that battle to Toprak all the way through this season. Had to be super aggressive with how he's ridden this year. We've seen him make some of the real daring overtaking moves of the last couple of seasons just to make sure he can stay at the front of the field. So you can't take anything away from Rea in the performances he's had this year.
So a look at the revised lineup, the revised starting grid for this 20-lap race 2 here in Jerez. The front row of the grid will read Toprak Razgatlioglu, Jonathan Rea promoted up to P2, replacing his teammate Alex Lowe second on the grid, and Scott Redding promoted up to P3. Toprak Razgatlioglu now with 14 race victories in World SBK, 9 of them taken in this 2021 campaign that's yielded 23 podiums, no less, and his first race victory here in Jerez sealed this morning.
Yeah, and certainly for Toprak, he's got that bit of momentum behind him. He's got that team behind him as well, and they made big steps forward from Friday to Saturday, and obviously for this morning's race as well, Toprak's got the bike underneath him that allowed him to win that race, but he had to fight really hard. We saw him make some pretty daring overtaking moves to win that race.
Only his second pole position in the Superbike World Championship, and he's chosen his timing nicely because he gets to line up from P1 twice, of course. Scott Redding will be promoted into third, so he completes the front row of the grid. Didn't have a good start in race one earlier on today, lost a couple of positions, ended up down in 6th place, battled his way back into third. Redding needs a better jump and run down to the first turn this time.
Yeah, and for Redding, that start's really crucial. But how many times through the course of the last couple of years have we seen it where Ducati's had a bit of ground to make up going into the final race of the weekend, and suddenly Redding and Giovanni Krupi find that little bit of something. Don't be surprised if Redding's able to keep himself that little bit closer to Toprak and Jonathan.
Second row of the grid, Michael Ruben Rinaldi, Andrea Locatelli and Loris Baz. Locatelli then starting in 5th position here, and has been a consistent man generally all the way since Assen, the 5th round of the season, the Dutch round, just the Catalonia round, going away from him ever so slightly in race 1 and the Superpole race, but very much back on the usual kind of form for Locatelli. 4th place is one he's almost made his own at stages this season.
Yeah, and all the way through this year, Locatelli's been able to build on the momentum from last year whenever he was in the Supersport class and winning that World Championship. And we've seen it all the way through that step by step he's made progress. Himself and Andrew Pitt working really well together. Important for them as well to bounce back after the disappointment in Catalonia, which had been one of the tougher weekends of the season for him.
This is Jonathan Rea now up in 2nd on the grid. Rea having secured his 209th career podium in race 1 earlier on today, and only his 2nd podium since leaving Magny-Cours. Of course, he had 2 races outside of the podium positions at the Catalonia round last weekend.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the big things where it's just to try and give yourself that chance to get back into the fight. We saw it this morning, he was able to do that, and now really important to be able to do it once again.
Back to the second row of the grid, Loris Baz, a rider with some experience in World SBK these days, and I don't think you could have asked for much more than a 6th position, top independent rider in terms of his performance in race 1 earlier on today. Great to see that Chaz Davies is following the action as well, and it looks like he might even be watching on the video pass with us.
But I hope that chair is comfy enough with those injured ribs for Chaz. Obviously, we're looking forward to seeing Chaz back in action for the final couple of rounds of the year, Argentina and Indonesia, and it'd be good to see him back out there in the Go 11 Ducati.
Second row of the grid here for Michael Ruben Rinaldi, who we missed a couple of moments ago, seeing Locatelli and Loris Baz. Rinaldi, of course, will be starting from 4th place, having qualified in P5. Had a crash in race number 1. Bad news for him, really. Still looking to add his first podium in Jerez. Hasn't made a result any better than 4th position around this circuit.
Yeah, Jerez is a tough circuit as well. It's tough to make overtaking moves. We saw that in this morning's race. And the reason for that is it's always closely matched manufacturer to manufacturer, rider to rider, because we spend so much time testing here. Everyone can get their bike in a ballpark, and that's why we tend to see such a closely matched field where suddenly if you lose ground, you lose a half a second or a second, it's very difficult to make up that ground again.
Yes, 4th position in 7 races is Michael Ruben Rinaldi's best result here at the Angel Nieto circuit. Third row of the grid then, Leon Haslam, Alvaro Bautista and Garrett Gerloff. It's Haslam here who starts from P7, again promoted 1 place, but unfortunately for him he tumbled through the field dramatically in race number 1, eventually coming home in 11th position.
Yeah, and obviously enough for Leon struggle in that opening race of the weekend. Now in the hotter track conditions, it's going to be interesting to see if he's able to fare any better. We did see that the 2 Honda riders opted for different tyres, so maybe in this race we'll see if Haslam opts for the same super soft compound tyre like his teammate Alvaro Bautista.
Yes, that direct comparison was certainly unflattering. Haslam finishing 16 seconds behind this man Alvaro Bautista, who is departing Honda for pastures new/old in 2022 by making a return to Ducati, and he's doing so just as he finds the best form he's had on board Honda machinery. That first podium of 2021, last time out at the Catalonia round, and 3 top 5 finishes in succession.
Yeah, and we've seen Bautista make that step forward, and Catalonia, especially on the Sunday, he was very impressive in the dry conditions, and in this morning's race as well, he managed that really well, and you'd expect to see him maintain that form because we know in the hot conditions he's always able to make his tyre last really well. Such a small, light rider, that does give him an advantage in terms of being able to use that super soft tyre.
Yes, he'll be hoping that the riders up at the front of the field struggle even more than they did perhaps in race number 1, that wasn't quite such a drain in terms of tyre life in the closing stage. stages.
Didn't look like Warrow was struggling up there in the top of the grandstand. Nice conditions here now for race 2. We've got 27 degrees. Air temperature, track temperature rising all the time as well. It is going to get a real challenge over the course of 20 laps to be able to manage things, and it's all about the top 2 riders in the World Championship fighting it out once again, you'd have to imagine.
Yes, direct comparison on the grid between Toprak Raz Gatlioglu and Jonathan Rea now that they are effectively side by side on the front row. Of course, it's a staggered grid, so not quite, but an opportunity for Jonathan